This is wrestling's greatest moments.
Hey now, wrestling fans! It's time for another episode of Wrestling's Greatest Moments. There's nothing like a babyface turn or a heel turn to get fans' adrenaline pumping. Sit back as Wrestling's Greatest Moments looks at turns that turned the wrestling world upside down, Part 2. Before we get started though, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single video. Here's the criteria. Wrestling fans saw many heel and babyface turns during the 1980s, but these are the creme de la creme from 1980 to 1989, and part 2 of a multi-part series, which means don't worry if one of your favorites isn't here, because there are plenty more on the way. Barry Windham heel turn. The heel turn that no one saw coming. Or did they? One of the high points of Barry Windham's heel turn on tag team partner Lex Luger, and not just any tag partner, his NWA World Tag Team Championship partner, was how on the one hand it seemed to come out of nowhere for many fans, yet in hindsight it made complete sense. Jim Crockett Promotions gave the fans every reason to think that the Windham-Luger team was running smoothly. Luger, who had turned babyface after leaving the Four Horsemen, teamed with longtime babyface Barry Windham to capture the NWA World Tag Team Championship from the Horsemen's Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. The babyface team also received the number 6 seed in the 1988 Crockett Cup, which increased their chances of winning the kayfabe $1 million prize. Like any good turn, the seeds were planted long before it happened, and fans paying close attention might have suspected something was coming. First, Windham was offered a spot in the Horsemen in January 1988 during an episode of World Championship Wrestling. Windham's former friend Lex Luger, who had abandoned Windham to join the Horsemen, apologized to Luger for his past heel activities, and the two rekindled their friendship, forming a tag team. Meanwhile, Ric Flair dropped several hints that the Horsemen were considering Windham to take over Luger's spot. In addition, the Horsemen's executive director James J. Dillon warned Windham that Luger wouldn't be there when he needed him the most. Despite these hints, the April 23, 1988 episode of World Championship Wrestling rocked the wrestling world when Windham attacked Luger during their title defense against Arn and Tully. The Horsemen did a fantastic job taking Luger out of the match, forcing Windham to fight much of the match on his own. Windham repeatedly went to his corner to tag in his partner, only to see no one there. Luger finally crawled to the corner, and Windham angrily tagged him in, power slamming Luger into the ring. Just to make it clear what was happening, Barry had a lariat on Luger as the Horsemen capitalized and pinned him, regaining the tag titles. Windham left the ring with James J. Dillon. The Midnight Rider, who had appeared after Dusty Rhodes was suspended from Jim Crockett Promotions for accidentally hitting JCP President Jim Crockett Jr. with a baseball bat, searched high and low for Windham. For more about the Midnight Rider, check out our video, The Midnight Rider's Magical Mystery Tour. A camera operator followed the rider to the backstage area as he sought answers. Finally, the masked man found the heel dressing room and confronted Windham. Not surprisingly, the Midnight Rider didn't receive a warm welcome as the heels attacked him, with the Horsemen's executive director James J. Dillon shouting for them to unmask him. Dillon, who suspected the rider was Dusty Rhodes, knew Rhodes would be banned from wrestling for 1 year if he was revealed as the Midnight Rider. Unfortunately, by the time the heels ripped off the mask, a small contingent of babyfaces ran in, covering the rider's head and leading him to safety. Windham's turn saw him ride off with the Horsemen in their limousine, holding the Midnight Rider's mask as he gave the Horsemen symbolic 4 sign. Barry's heel turn led to an incredible run as a heel and one of the most successful incarnations of the Four Horsemen. Windham followed in his father Blackjack Mulligan's footsteps by adopting the claw as his finisher and wearing a black glove, while fans will forever debate which version of the Horsemen was the best, with the original version often mentioned as a favorite. The Windham version is often mentioned in the top 2. Randy Savage babyface turn. Randy Savage's 1987 babyface turn began a 2-part saga that was brilliantly booked from start to finish. Book 1 featured the Macho Man's face turn and Mega Power's partnership with Hulk Hogan, while Book 2 saw the team's tragic deterioration and Savage's return to villainy. However, none of this could have happened without the brilliant build that led to Savage accepting the fans' cheers. Randy Savage's portrayal of a heel was sheer perfection. Like everything in his life, Savage went all in on his performance, mastering the nuances it took to enrage audiences when he battled it out in the ring and also savaging opponents, no pun intended, on the microphone in interviews. At the same time, the Macho Man's undeniable charisma and style entertained fans. So much so that he began winning them over, despite some dirty deeds such as cheating his way to the Intercontinental Championship and nearly ending Ricky Steamboat's career. More and more, the fans began taking notice of Savage. By the time the Macho Man lost the Intercontinental title to Steamboat at WrestleMania 3, it was clear the fans were ready to embrace him as a hero. Savage was too, as he looked ahead to his future following his loss to Steamboat. During an interview with the Tampa Tribune, Savage discussed focusing on climbing to the top of the WWF mountain and taking Hulk Hogan's spot. Apparently, Savage wasn't alone in this plan, as things would lead to the unforgettable October 3rd, 1987 episode of Saturday Night's Main Event, where Savage turned babyface. The turn was no last-minute plan. As noted in the book, Macho Man, The Untamed, Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage. Meanwhile, the WWF had put the internal wheels in motion months earlier for a program with a massive game-changing storyline, Hulk Hogan joining forces with the Macho Man. According to WWF writer Bruce Pritchard, aka Brother Love, the WWF carefully planned Savage's face turn. The tide was turning so much with Randy being really popular at the time. This just solidified his superstar babyfacedom, with Hulk coming out and sprinkling the Hulk dust and getting him involved in the beginning of that formation. The turn began with a match that on paper appeared to be a heel versus heel bout, a rarity in the WWF. Randy Savage was looking to win his second Intercontinental Championship from the Honky Tonk Man. The Honky Tonk Man had defeated Ricky Steamboat for the belt after Steamboat requested time off to witness the birth of his first child. Vince McMahon took the title off Steamboat and put it on Honky Tonk, who got over as a cheating, cowardly heel with a knack for antagonizing fans with his Elvis impersonator gimmick. Although Savage hadn't officially turned babyface, the fans were behind him as he battled the Honky Tonk Man, overcoming outside interference from Jimmy Mouth of the South Hart and WWF Tag Team Champions the Hart Foundation, Bret the Hitman Hart, and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Savage delivered his finisher, the Flying Elbow Smash, to the champion, covering him for a certain 3 count, only for the Hart Foundation to break up the pin and save the Honky Tonk Man's title. The heels immediately took out Savage, with the Tag Team Champions holding him while the Honky Tonk Man prepared to break his guitar over Savage's head. Savage's manager, Miss Elizabeth, begged the Honky Tonk Man for mercy, and even stood in his path, preventing Honky Tonk from hitting her client. Then, in a true heel move, the Intercontinental Champion shoved Elizabeth aside, knocking her to the mat. She bailed out of the ring, apparently abandoning her man. The payoff came when Liz returned with WWF Champion Hulk Hogan in tow. Seeing what was going on, the Hulkster raced to Savage's rescue. Although the two had fought before, Hogan's sense of fair play meant he couldn't stand by and let a wrestler take a 3-on-1 thrashing. The Hulkster cleaned house with Savage's help. Then, the two backed up into each other, nearly coming to blows. But then, Savage did the unthinkable. He offered his hand to Hogan. Announcer Vince McMahon wondered what would happen with a meeting of Hulkamania in the Madness. Hulk shook Savage's hand and a partnership was formed. Equally important, Savage was now a full-fledged babyface. Savage's babyface turn would come in handy as he later formed the Mega Powers with the Hulkster. When Hulk took time off to film his cinematic masterpiece No Holds Barred, Savage stepped in as WWF Champion, holding down the fort and enjoying a successful run as the champ. According to Hulk Hogan, the agreement was that Randy would take the belt and keep it until I was done making No Holds Barred. Then I was going to get the belt back, and Randy was comfortable with that. He was a horse sometimes, but when it came to business, he was always on the money, always ready to give and take. Book 1 saw Savage embrace the fans and reach the top of the WWF. Book 2 would see his character's jealousy consume him, eventually costing him everything. However, that's a story for another day. Paul Orndorff heel turn. Some turns are unexpected, but other turns fans can see coming from a million miles away. Paul Orndorff stood into the latter category, as WWF fans knew the man with a hair-trigger temper was headed for a major explosion with his friend Hulk Hogan. Mr. Wonderful, who had turned babyface in 1985 after Rowdy Roddy Piper blamed him for the loss at the first WrestleMania, was Hulk Hogan's occasional tag team partner, as they had a common group of enemies. Little did Hogan know, but he would soon join Orndorff's hit list thanks to some mind games from adorable Adrian Adonis. Adonis, who had taken over Rowdy Roddy Piper's talk segment, Piper's Pit, and replaced it with his flower shop, began living rent-free in Orndorff's head, planting the seeds of jealousy in Mr. Wonderful's mind. Orndorff's volatile personality made for fertile ground as Adonis hinted that Hogan didn't have Orndorff's back. Adonis told Orndorff that Mr. Wonderful did all the work and Hogan received the majority of the cheers and sold the most dolls. Orndorff was not happy and shouted he doesn't take a back seat to anyone. The Hulkster confronted Adonis on the flower shop, warning adorable Adrian not to stick his powdered nose in his business or that of his friends. Orndorff's woes continued when he confronted former manager Bobby the Brain Heenan on the flower shop. Adonis and Heenan mocked Orndorff as Hulk Jr., with Heenan challenging Hulk Jr. to face his team of King Kong Bundy and Big John Studd. Orndorff was so confident he said he could pick up the phone anytime and reach his friend. That wasn't so, though, as Orndorff phoned Hogan backstage but was told the Hulkster was working out, and irate Mr. Wonderful was ready to cancel the match. Cooler heads prevailed, but Orndorff began making unilateral decisions, including getting a tune-up match against the Moondogs before facing Bundy and Studd. Orndorff and Hogan were ready, especially since Heenan offered $100,000 to anyone who slammed Studd or pinned Bundy. Nonetheless, Hogan and Orndorff knew they were in for a challenge. Hogan had battled Bundy at WrestleMania 2 after the big man sidelined him with a brutal Pearl Harbor job on Saturday night's main event. In addition, Studd and Bundy had injured Hogan's friends, Hillbilly Jim and Andre the Giant. Even the power of Hulkamania and Orndorff would be challenged. The two supposed friends' match against former WWF Tag Team Champions, the Moondogs, showed there was already trouble brewing. After Hogan started the match, Mr. Wonderful showboated his way through the bout, treating it like a handicap match by taking on Rex and Spot without tagging in his partner. Orndorff ran into trouble, but ultimately prevailed. However, fans knew he couldn't do the same with Studd and Bundy, but would his pride blind him to the dangers? The match against Bundy and Studd was a tipping point. Orndorff struggled against Bundy and Studd, finding he couldn't take them on alone. An attempted slam of Big John Studd failed. Finally, Orndorff tagged Hogan, who fared better, even slamming Big John Studd. Orndorff was incensed. However, the heels regrouped and Hogan needed a tag badly. Unfortunately, Hogan backed into Mr. Wonderful, knocking him off the apron. Heenan's monster team double-teamed Hogan, eventually throwing the referee aside. Orndorff staggered into the ring, with color commentator Bruno Sammartino suggesting Orndorff had been struck in the eye. Orndorff raised Hogan's hand, only to clothesline him and deliver a piledriver. Orndorff celebrated backstage with Bundy, Studd, Heenan, and Adonis chanting, "Wonderful! Wonderful!" Hogan eventually appeared in a video where he reviewed the events leading up to Orndorff's turn. The Hulkster watched the various episodes play out as he analyzed it like someone scrutinizing the Zapruder film. The WWF Champion's anguish and anger made this a must-see program. As Tim Hornbaker writes, "There was immense interest in that feud, and houses popped across the country. In Landover, Maryland, Hogan and Orndorff drew 20,000, another 18,000 in Chicago, and more than 11,000 in Minneapolis." Mr. Wonderful's Betrayal became the hottest program in the WWF in 1986, as he and Hogan battled across the country and beyond, including August 1986's record-setting stadium show in Toronto, the big event, Nikita Koloff face turn. As we've seen, some turns are predictable, while others only make sense with the benefit of hindsight. Like the Russian Nightmare himself, Nikita Koloff's turn was unique as no one expected it. In 1986, the American Dream Dusty Rhodes was teaming with Magnum TA against the Four Horsemen. Magnum, who was quickly becoming the promotion's #1 babyface, had just finished a best-of-7 series against Nikita over the United States Championship. Although Magnum lost the 7th and deciding match in controversial fashion, with Nikita getting a major assist from his kayfabe uncle, Ivan Koloff, he didn't lose a step and was promoted stronger than ever. Tragedy struck when Magnum was involved in a devastating automobile accident on October 14, 1986. While Magnum survived the crash, doctors told him his wrestling career was over. Indeed, it was unknown whether Magnum would ever walk again. Magnum's accident was a personal tragedy and a disaster for Jim Crockett Promotions, which had been building Magnum since his debut years earlier. Magnum was only 27 years old at the time of his crash. he was on a very short list of potential world heavyweight champions and considered a logical successor to Flair. The sudden loss of Magnum forced JCP to immediately change its booking structure, and Rhodes quickly devised a new plan. Dusty Rhodes scrambled to find someone to stabilize the promotion, if nothing else. Magnum might be irreplaceable, but wrestling's a show must go on mentality meant Dusty had to find a new tag team partner. In his memoir, Dusty, Reflections of an American Dream, Rhodes recalls just how important Magnum was. When he went down, the blow was unbelievable, not only because he was a friend, but because once you get your composure, you had to think about what you're going to do for business. Jim Crockett Promotions set up a match to introduce Dusty's new partner, and if things worked out, bolster its babyface roster. The match was particularly important as it involved Dusty and Magnum battling the Four Horsemen's Ole Anderson and Tully Blanchard in a steel cage. The event had already sold many tickets, and canceling or changing the match could have been catastrophic for Jim Crockett Promotions, as it was in a fierce battle with the WWF. The match was changed to Dusty and a mystery partner battling the Horsemen. But who was the Dream's mystery partner? This presented a huge opportunity for whoever was chosen. Nikita Koloff remembers the secrecy involved in the turn and what promoter Jim Crockett Jr. told him. When we say no one will know, we mean no one. The only people who will know are the three of us, period. None of the other boys will know. You're not to tell the other wrestlers. You can't even tell Ivan. You don't tell anyone. I'm telling you, Nikki, I really think this will work. We will do some business and draw some big crowds. There are plenty of reasons to think the turn might fail. How would fans react to a heel who had previously portrayed a loyal citizen of the Soviet Union now working with Dusty Rhodes? In addition, how would the locker room react to Nikita getting a prime position on the roster? Nikita had already faced resentment by some for the huge push he received when he debuted in Jim Crockett Promotions. It didn't matter though, because the fans embraced Nikita. On October 18, 1986, Dusty walked to the ring with Nikita right behind him. The fans had to wonder though, Dusty had been betrayed previously in a cage match by Ole Anderson. Would history repeat itself and Nikita join the Horsemen in attacking the American Dream? That didn't happen. Instead, Nikita laid into Ole Anderson as the fans cheered. Dusty and Koloff made short work of Anderson and James J. Dillon, who was substituting for an injured Tully Blanchard, and the fans never looked back, chanting Nikita's name as the rest of the Horsemen watched in disbelief. Jim Crockett Promotions wisely followed up with promos from Dusty and Nikita, with Nikita expressing the respect he'd gained for Magnum during their Best of 7 series. Both he and Dusty agreed they came from different worlds, but they were both dedicated to being the best in the business. Nikita said he was his own man, and he took orders from no one, including the Kremlin and his Uncle Ivan. Nikita would continue being the Russian Nightmare, setting his sights on Ric Flair's NWA World Heavyweight Championship much as he'd done before. Nikita's turn was a major success. In his book on the 1980s Wrestling War, The Death of the Territories, Tim Hornbaker writes, as a result of all the positive reaction he was receiving, Koloff was pushed into the main event of Starrcade against Ric Flair on November 27, 1986. Nikita Koloff's turn was a brilliant example of how a turn can stabilize a promotion after a disastrous event, in this case the loss of a top star, and exceed expectations. Nikita would thrive as one of JCP's top babyfaces until his wife's illness led to him taking time off. Larry Zbyszko heel turn. 1980 was a phenomenal year for heel turns, with 2 programs showing just how much wrestling fans could get emotionally invested in pro wrestling, and in the process pay to see babyfaces get their revenge. Ole Anderson's violent betrayal of Dusty Rhodes in a steel cage was one of the big turns of 1980. The other was Larry Zbyszko turning on his mentor Bruno Sammartino so he could take the living legend spot at the top of the WWF. The feud would lead to a now legendary steel cage match between Larry and Bruno at the WWF's final Showdown at Chase Supercard, leading the big bucks for Vince McMahon Sr., Larry Zbyszko, and of course Bruno Sammartino. Larry Zbyszko's entree into wrestling was unusual in that he pestered WWF champion Bruno Sammartino until he began training him. Once Bruno felt Larry was ready to compete, he helped him break into the business, telling him, "When I spoke to Larry about the plans, I explained to him that he'd be starting at the bottom of the ladder, but it was a ladder that went from the basement of the big time all the way up to the penthouse. I told him that the best way to climb that ladder was slowly and with patience. I told him that in time, I was sure he could become a tremendous headliner. Zbyszko debuted in the WWWF in 1973, eventually winning the WWWF Tag Team Championship alongside Tony Garea in 1978, before dropping them in 1979 to Johnny and Jerry Valiant. However, as the decade closed, Zbyszko was unhappy with his spot in the WWWF. From Bruno Sammartino's perspective, there was much going on with his protege behind the scenes. As the weeks rolled on, I didn't hear from Larry as often as I used to. At first, I didn't pay too much attention to that since I was immersed in my own affairs. Then, some friends told me that Larry was having some serious personal problems. Larry was reeling from the fallout of a failed marriage, one in which he had fathered a child. I also heard that he was very dissatisfied with the way he was moving up through the ranks of professional wrestling. According to Bruno, Larry knew the living legend was retiring soon, and he suggested he turn heel by betraying Bruno. Bruno claims he wasn't gung-ho about the idea, but he knew it would be a box office bonanza. After persuading Vince McMahon Sr., the angle took shape, as mentioned in the book Wrestling's Greatest Moments. It went like this. Things began to simmer when Sammartino was scheduled to interview Zbyszko after a match, only to have his student walk right past him. When the situation repeated itself the following week, fans knew something was definitely up. That something turned out to be Zbyszko's growing frustration that he would never emerge from Bruno's shadow. Larry asked Bruno to give him a chance by wrestling him. Otherwise, Larry would retire, certain his career was over. Bruno reluctantly agreed, with the provision that the match be a scientific one. Larry agreed as the fans waited to see things play out. When they finally met, the two traded holds, but it was crystal clear that despite his progress training under Sammartino, Zbyszko was still the student with much to learn. As the younger man was outclassed in the ring, he grew more and more embarrassed, and finally he exploded in anger. The result was a brutal wooden chair assault that left Sammartino bloody and lying in the ring. Just like that, Zbyszko had become public enemy number one. Bruno was enraged as never before, labeling Zbyszko a Judas and vowing to destroy him. Sammartino almost got his wish when the two met up at Madison Square Garden on March 24, 1980, with Sammartino choking out his former student. Manager Arnold Skolin and referee Dick Kroll stopped Bruno from taking out Larry, and Sammartino was disqualified for refusing to break the choke. Their next match on April 21st at the Garden ended in a count-out loss for Zbyszko as he took a powder. Bruno and Larry proved Vince McMahon Sr. wrong with their feud. McMahon didn't think the feud had the legs to go beyond one match. Instead, the angle was red hot. We sold out everywhere we went, the fans screaming for Larry's head on a platter. One day we went to Washington in the afternoon and Baltimore in the evening. We sold out both large arenas, even though they were so close to each other. It was decided that the final match would be held at Shea. Showdown at Shea's cage match was a moment fans had waited months for. Bruno's chance to trap Zbyszko and beat him to a pulp. That's exactly how things played out for several minutes, and so Larry hit a desperation move, a low blow. Needless to say, the audience was livid. The fans started running through the outfield trying to reach the cage. Police officers and security guards were tackling them. It looked like a football game had broken out. While Zbyszko wondered whether the fans might break through, Bruno struggled to find his blade. Eventually he found it, blading and giving the fans the crimson mask they'd expected. However, they wanted to see it on Zbyszko, not their hero. Eventually Bruno mounted his comeback, beating Zbyszko senselessly until he exited the cage, winning the match. Showdown at Shea was a success, with ProWrestlingHistory.com reporting the show drew 36,295 fans and a $541,730 box office. While the steel cage match between Sammartino and Zbyszko ended their series in the WWF's primary market of New York City, they continued feuding in the WWF's other markets, drawing big crowds. Sammartino retired in 1981, working a WWF match for the grand opening of the Meadowlands Arena and then touring with Giant Baba in Japan. As for Zbyszko, Bruno Sammartino believes Larry should have left the WWF after their program, as Zbyszko was in big demand. Instead, remained in the WWF, wrestling other babyfaces to comparatively disappointing box office results. At the time, I believed that Larry should have taken the many offers that were flooding in from promoters all over the country and moved. But he chose not to do that. He had so much publicity, he could have gone to another territory, especially Charlotte, where Jim Crockett Jr. wanted him to wrestle the local heroes there like Ricky Steamboat, Ric Flair, and others. His natural arrogance in the South would have probably drawn turn-away crowds. Zbyszko eventually left the WWF in March 1981, working in Japan, and later, Georgia Championship Wrestling. While the self-dubbed New Living Legend's career flourished, nothing ever matched his series against his mentor. What were your favorite turns from the 1980s? Don't worry if we missed one of your favorites, because even more videos are on the way. Share your thoughts in the comment section, and let us know if there's any videos you'd like Wrestling's Greatest Moments to cover. In the meantime, subscribe to our channel, follow us on X and Instagram, and spread the good news about Wrestling's Greatest Moments, the channel that celebrates the squared circle.